Now we're going to talk about teachers and their students and how they are able to function during COVID. How successful is distance learning? What is working? What is not? What are the challenges faced by the students? How about teachers being stressed out? And some, what are the take home lessons? So many questions. Hope to get to all of them. Let me introduce my teacher guests. Jose Rivas is an engineering and AP science teacher at Lennox Math, Science, and Technology Academy. That's a charter school in LA County. Welcome to Science Friday.
Thank you, Aaron. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. Dr. Rabiah Harris is the seventh grade science teacher and science department chair at Jefferson Middle School Academy. That's a public school in Southwest DC. Welcome to Science Friday.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you too. Let me begin with you. Jose. What is different about teaching this fall versus last spring when you were thrust into this situation?
Well, so my classes are very hands-on. We build stuff, we're designing, we're breaking things apart. So that's been the biggest change, trying to capture that same excitement of breaking things and putting them together and coming up with new ideas and using, really advanced equipment. We have welders, we have 3D printers, and moving away from that has been probably the biggest change that I've had to deal with.
Yeah, because what you're saying is that when you were all in the classroom, there were all these hands-on learning experiences that don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so right now it's coming up with alternatives, virtual alternatives, so that the students can still get that sense, and still get some of that design work. So we're doing a lot of design work now versus prototyping. We could do virtual prototyping. So we're doing what we can with the resources that are available.
Rabia, you teach seventh grade, which is, I imagine, very heavy into science. What's different about how you're teaching now?
I would say similarly, we don't do quite as much prototyping as I don't teach engineering anymore, but I used to, as Jose does. But we also did a lot of things hands-on in class. And so there has been a big adjustment. But I think that the lessons I learned in the spring have really helped me to do better this fall because I still have my students working in groups. I still have them doing tasks together. And I even sent them home with the materials for next semester, next quarter. So I'm really excited about them getting to do some hands-on things, even though we're apart.
I'm glad you picked that up because when I picture remote learning, I imagine that instead of the students sitting in a classroom listening to their teacher for 6 hours, they would be just sitting in on a Zoom call like we're doing with their classmates, listening to the teacher for 6 hours. But that's not what's happening, you say.
No, not in my class. So I have my students 80 minutes 2 times a week, and I see 4 different sets of students. So we flip flop days, and Wednesday is an asynchronous day altogether for students. And I have teacher meetings, but my students come in, we do like a fun icebreaker. Like yesterday, I asked them if they are team apple cider or team apple juice. And then we got to talk about we had a do now just with what we were doing, but then they immediately go into a task where they work together, even having their own small mini calls or just talking on a discussion board. And I sort of monitor and go around to different rooms, in a sense, breakout rooms to see them. And then we come back together and they get to present out. And then I do like a short little thing, and then they go do some asynchronous work, and I stay on the call for students who need help. So I try not to talk at them for longer than 5 to 10 minutes if possible.
Jose, let's talk about other things that are going on. I know that as a person with a life outside the classroom, when you're teaching at home, there must be other considerations going on in your own home too, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have two daughters, one in high school, one just starting middle school. So yeah, it's as sometimes as I'm teaching, they'll come up and ask me a question that they have for their own classroom. And, it's all about flexibility. So, the same things are going on in my students' homes. So we have this, one of the things that I talk to my students about is, we build relationships. And that's one of the key things right now with distance learning is building those relationships and having that flexibility. So yeah, my students will see my daughters on the Zoom call and, I'll help them out, and sometimes they'll pitch in and help, It's about building these relationships and having flexibility and understanding. And I think that's what's working a lot with my class is those, not focusing on, let's say, grades, but focusing on, things that we can talk about, that things that they're interested in. And then, obviously we have to do schoolwork and we have to be accountable. But, there's just like I'm going through a lot of stuff here, they're going through a lot of stuff. So it's important to have that understanding and support each other because we're all in it together.
Do you think there is something different about teaching STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, remotely versus another subject, English, literature, whatever? Jose.
Um, oh yeah, so definitely. One of the things about science and the one thing that always fascinated me about science and engineering is this idea of community and building consensus. So you collect all these data points, you create these models, you create these prototypes, and there's discussion, and there's community, and there's building. And trying to bring that into the virtual world is unique, and it's possible to do, if you have the right relationship building, if you have the right strategies in there. So, a lot of social emotional learning strategies that you include in there. You also include trauma informed teaching strategies to bring the students out and contribute and still have that sense of community.
Hmm. Rabia, how do you keep science learning fresh and different every day? When do you have to do you find that a challenge as you teach remotely?
I do sometimes find it a challenge, but it was a challenge that I wanted to have in the classroom too. This is my 16th year teaching, and I think that sometimes my mom's been teaching for 52 years. So I think that you definitely can get to a point where you're like, I've done this before, I can do it this way. And so, in some ways, virtual helped to like reinvigorate that because I'm like, I can't do this the exact same
We have the Wi-Fi gremlins are working with us.
that's a challenge that I really love to have. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, that's a challenge that I really love to have. So even though it is something that I have to do, I feel really excited to do it. So I think about ways to that it'll be interesting for them. But I teach life science right now, so it's about you. It's about who you are. We're doing the human body right now, so that's there with the human body every day.
Can you use stuff that's found in the house versus what you would normally find in the classroom or have to bring in the classroom? I mean, is there sort of an advantage to some kind of projects that you can do them at home, Rabia?
Yes, I think there definitely are. Like I said, we're doing the human body. So right now, your body is a part of what we're learning about, but we're also about to do plants. So I did send them home with seeds. They just came to school to pick up seeds and soil in little pots, and they'll get to design their own experiments, which a lot of my students haven't had the experience doing. One of my kids even said, I've never grown a plant, Miss Harris. I don't know if this is going to work. And I was like, but the point is that we're going to try, and that it's okay if it doesn't work out perfectly.
Now, I know that your son is in school right now, and I want to know, does being a parent and seeing his learning inform you how you teach remotely? You're learning from what you're watching him going through.
It definitely does. So on days when he's feeling pretty like, oh my gosh, it's still going on, I definitely consider like, did I talk that long today? Did I ask students to do that much today? I might need to tone it back a little bit. But for the most part, he's really enjoying learning middle school. He's never been in middle school before. He's in the sixth grade. So he's really trying to figure out what that's all really like. So it's been pretty cool getting to watch him and getting to see what they do at his school because he doesn't go to my school.
I'll bet. I'll bet. Jose, I want to ask you about a term that I just became familiar with, and it's called social emotional learning. Why does that help students transition into distance learning? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, this social emotional learning aspect of teaching has always been one of my foci, even before we went into pandemic mode. So it's about, the students self-regulating, both academically and emotionally, giving student choice, giving them opportunities to express their thoughts, and this is all embedded within science. So, so for example, how I would embed empathy. So we would use design thinking processes, which start with empathy as the impetus for creating a new solution to a problem. So there's ways to embed it. And so when my students went from last year in March last school year, we had these experience in the classroom. So when we transferred over to distance learning, we were able to keep that same dynamic, even though we were, outside in our own homes. So that social emotional learning part helped them continue to, monitor their emotions and create smart goals and continue that process. Obviously, now it's a little bit more difficult because I don't have a lot of these is like the first time I have a lot of the students. So I'm still teaching those skills, but when you teach online, it takes twice as long. There's so many issues with internet and stuff that's going on in their homes. So that becomes a part of this process of understanding and implementing strategies that are included in social emotional learning to keep the students motivated and keep them in the classroom and keep them, wanting to do the different projects. So it's been really beneficial for my students and for myself, because we have conversations and we both grow together, and we're going to get through this together.
Do the caregivers or the parents at home have to buy into this also?
You know what? These, it has fancy words, but this is stuff that teachers do every day. And parents want them to do it too. They want their kids to self-regulate, to say, you know what, I need to do the chores today without no one telling them. So these are ideas that, parents love. I like it when my daughters clean their room and I don't have to tell them anything, or they set up an agenda, or they tell me how they're feeling. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a tremendous buy-in because it's something that we want our students and our kids to do.
Rabia, did you have any expectations for how remote learning was going to go that have changed once you actually started doing it?
I tried to not have as many expectations. I knew that internet could be something. I actually had a fire at my house in April, so I ended up being in temporary housing. So I ended up not having like Wi-Fi, and I know that my students have gone through similar things for lots of reasons. So I think that my biggest thing was trying not to have too many expectations and helping my students, as Jose just said, to know that I'm empathetic of whatever they might be going through, just because they need to know that I care about them. So I even have an expectation that says, if you're not in the headspace for learning today, let me know so we can work something else out. Because I think at the end of the day, there is still a pandemic. I am asking them to be online. The school district has asked them to be online, but other things that could be happening that are more important than that at the moment. And if they just let me know, I can help them like work through what I'm asking of them so that they don't feel overburdened by this too.
Let me turn the question about home education around and say, have you learned anything at during this home stay where the kids are at home that you would take back to the physical classroom with you when you get back there?
I definitely would. So I try to always think of myself as like a teacher who looks at things holistically, but I've done that even more so now. So we learn about a phenomena and then we have a series of lessons that go with that and then do a project. But I let my students now, if they can show mastery on that project, which lots of people do in the classroom as mastery based learning, but it wasn't something that my school was doing, I let them have that project count for multiple things. So at the end of the quarter or the end of that unit, they get to go back and let some things count for whatever mastery they showed on their project versus having to go back and do a whole bunch of work that they missed for whatever reason. And I think at the end of the day, my students are still being able to show mastery, but it's not about like, did you turn in all 5 things that we did? Like if you turned in one that was really great, that was comprehensive, then I'll let that one count.
I know I was talking to a teacher because I heard the word unit come in, which is teachers use all the time. Let me follow up with you, Jose. Have you learned anything that you would take back into the physical classroom with you?
Yeah, so it's been interesting in terms of like my engineering design classes where, before it was just, we have these hours during school time, and now I have students like they'll send me like a Zoom invite at 7 p.m. Hey, Mr. Rivas, we want to go over this design with you. Are you busy right now? We want to talk. And that's something that didn't happen before, and I like that, that they're into what they're doing and they want to talk. And yeah, definitely, if I'm available, I will jump in. And that's something, that I want to take back, especially like, if they have homework questions, right? Or they have project questions, they know that I'm available. And, understanding how to use Zoom and learning the Zoom system, we have that opportunity now to just continue the conversation within reason, obviously, because, teachers need to break too. But it's nice to have that additional flexibility. So I'm definitely going to take that back.
And I know that you work in a school community that is primarily Latinx. What are the specific challenges your school community has faced and is facing during the pandemic?
Yeah, so we have a lot of essential workers here in Lennox community. So, we've had a lot of parents get laid off. We've had increased COVID cases here. So it's been challenging in that respect. But we have a great, so we're an independent charter, and so we have a really great staff, a really great program. That one of the things that happens a lot with especially with distance learning is you lose students. You don't know what happened to them, uh, because sometimes there's no way of contacting them. So that's one of the things that we focused on in our school, is making sure we can reach all of our students and give them the help that they need, and whatever it is, whether it's providing food or providing counseling, or whatever the services are. And it's nice, we have that flexibility because we're a small school. We're only 560 students, but we have a really dedicated staff. And it's that unity, that community that's helping us right now within our community, to support our students, to move them academically, and to support them emotionally. So yeah, we got a really great program here that's helping a lot of our students and the community.
Let me ask both of you this question, and I'm sure I'll be asking it of many teachers. And that is, I've heard from teachers saying that they are just getting burned out by this teaching kids at home. And I've heard a statistic that says maybe 1 in 3 teachers are not going to go back to school full time. What do you say to this, Rabia?
That's definitely possible. I have a whole group of friends. We have a whole group chat, and some days are feel longer than others. And it definitely, there's a lot to think about, and thinking about ways for self care and trying to turn off and not leaving, your device on to answer questions. Because a lot in the spring, I was answering emails at 11:30, phone calls at midnight, because that's when kids were up and they were trying to get their work done, and I felt like I had to be there for them. So I think that one of my biggest things that my friends and I talk about is like turning off, like saying like, okay, after 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I'm done for today, taking the time on the weekend to do things for us, because I think that it can really feel, because you're home and you're on the same device you were on all day at school, you don't really get that separation of like traveling home. You don't get that separation of going somewhere on the way home and like stopping and like taking a moment. So I think that the biggest thing is working in that time. But the reality of it is that it is a lot for a lot of teachers. And I think that school districts have to be ready for that, or ready to think about the things they can do to help teachers cope in the midst of all of this.
I know many schools started out fully remote at the beginning of the school year, hoping to move to a hybrid in person model after a few months. But with COVID cases spiking now in most states, it seems like remote learning is going to continue throughout the fall. And one state where COVID is running rampant is Wisconsin, where over the past week, there have been on average about 3,400 new cases per day, according to the New York Times. Joining now the discussion is Rick Erickson, chemistry and physics teacher at Bayfield High School in Bayfield, Wisconsin. Welcome to Science Friday.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Rick, I know you teach in Wisconsin, one of the worst states experience COVID spikes right now. What's happened to your school's plans to go back to school learning?
Well, our plans, we developed plans starting last April and through the summer, and fortunately, we had a lot of voices in the making of those plans. So we really developed a multi-tiered approach, anticipating that things were going to be changing throughout the year, just like we're seeing. And so we had to have a plan in place that identifies a fully virtual model, a couple of different hybrid models, depending on how much we have to socially distance, and then hopefully at some point a return to full face-to-face, which I really don't see happening in the near future. And I think, the recent spikes in Wisconsin have really challenged our thinking, because I think what we're starting to see, and I hear this not just in Wisconsin, but in many places, we're starting to see a lot of COVID fatigue. And so it's happening, these spikes are happening at the time where people are also getting tired of dealing with the issue. And so, there's, even though we were leveled off for a while, there was talk then of going back into the hybrid model. And already there's the question, what are the metrics that determine whether we go back or not? But there's also the drive from home about, people who want their kids in school and the challenges that are faced at home. And so we understand those challenges. And so we started making the move to look at the hybrid model, and we're still looking at that. But now with the spike, everybody's taking a step back and reevaluating. And again, it's that question of what are the bottom line metrics that determine when we move into those phases. And some schools have those and other schools don't.
Well, let me bring that up a little bit more, because I know the indigenous communities across the U.S. are being hit pretty heavily. Did that factor into your school's consideration of whether to return to school this fall?
Absolutely. A lot of our families are multi-generational families, and so there's higher risk in those families. And with that really played a big role in our determining to go back fully virtual. We're the only school in the area that went fully virtual at the beginning of the year. Across the state of Wisconsin, primarily it was the major metropolitan areas, Madison and Milwaukee, who went back virtually. Otherwise, most schools went back either in a hybrid, or a lot of them went back 5 days face-to-face full time. And so we definitely, in working with the community, the makeup of our community played a big role in our decision to go virtual.
That's the Anishnabe.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
I know you've been teaching for 37 years, and I'm sure you've had to update your materials over the years, right?
Yeah.
But this must be totally different for you during COVID-19 to adapt your curriculum.
Absolutely. That's a good point. And I think you're going to hear this from most teachers. We adapt our curriculum every day and every year. I mean, that's what keeps us invigorated, right? It's the science not only changes, but there's so many different ways you can approach the way you teach science. And so we're always changing. But there is no question that this has been the biggest challenge in my career without a doubt, the biggest challenge is not having the kids in the classroom. And you're going to hear this from other teachers as well. It's the connections with kids that matter, and it's the relationships that you build, and doing that remotely and virtually is so much harder. It's not that you can't do it, but it's those interactions in the hallways, and the interactions when they come into your classroom, and as they walk into the building, and all those little pieces that build that relationship that allow you to teach. That's what opens it up to kids wanting to be educated, is the relationship they form with their teachers. And so that's been the biggest challenge, without a doubt, is how do you bridge that in a virtual setting, let alone just the, trying to bring in the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards. There are some components that in teaching physics, teaching those virtually is fine, but the scientific practices and the engineering practices, that is so much more difficult to teach in a virtual setting.
And of course, 37 years ago, you never had Googling, right, for the answers to their assignments if they want to. How does that change your approach to teaching students when kids can just do that?
Okay, that is an awesome question, and we've been making that change for the last many years. We know that people have access. It's a different world today. It's not memorizing the periodic table. We know people have access to information. So it's actually more fun as a science teacher, because you can bring in problem solving, and but it really changes the way. So we've been making those changes. The biggest change for me right now is, how do I address assessment? Because I know that's a different piece, because I know kids have access to information. And so it's really forced me to look at assessment in a totally different way. And I think it's a healthy way. And this is one of those, the the silver linings that might come out of this, that it's made me look at assessment in the way that it's not really about solving a physics problem. That's doing a math problem. It's about, do you understand the processes? And so I'm fortunate that I teach in a small district, so I can have individual contact with kids. But in assessments during the virtual world, it's been more about, okay, you can solve it algebraically, but I want to know your thought processes. I want you to explain, how did you go about doing this? And it's actually resulted in a lot more creativity and problem solving, which has been awesome. It's harder to write an assessment, but I have to write it knowing that they have access to a lot of information.
Rabiah, you teach remotely, but still do hands-on with science with the students, as you told us, and you said you do something called phenomena first learning. What is that, and is it compatible with remote learning?
I think it is. You just have to think about it differently. But NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards, definitely promote you to do phenomena-based learning, where students learn about the phenomena first. That helps them to really want to investigate more. So it helps them to want to be the driver of what's going on. Like, why is that happening? Why are those tree roots growing that way, or whatever the case might be? And I think that it can happen in the virtual space. I definitely thought of a phenomena initially as something that they're actually physically doing, like looking at and doing in the classroom, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that sometimes for things that I did have in that way, units that did start out like you had to physically touch something, I might just have to think about them differently now, but it's not impossible. And I think my biggest thing is just making sure that I don't ever think that it's impossible, that like, oh, we can't ever do science the way we did it before, because that's not true.
I want to bring on some more science educators. We reached out to our vast community of science educators about what the return to school has been like, and many of them had unique stories and tips to share about teaching STEM during the pandemic. And I'd like to bring in a few more of these teachers to continue with our discussion. So let me introduce them now. Megan Sorensen is a 6 to 8 science teacher at JKL Bahweting, Anishnabe. I got it right before, Public School Academy in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and a 2019 Science Friday Educator Collaborator. Welcome to Science Friday.
Hi, Ira. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Autumn Rivera is a 6th grade science teacher at Glenwood Springs Middle School. That's Glenwood, and she teaches also the education program at Colorado Mountain College. Welcome to Science Friday.
Thanks so much for having me.
Michael Hirsch is a math and science teacher and science curriculum writer at the Acera School in Winchester, Massachusetts. Welcome to join us.
Pleasure to be here, Ira.
Nice to have you. Jeff Grant is a high school science teacher at Downers Grove North High School. That's in Downers Grove, Illinois. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Ira. It's a pleasure.
Nice to have you. Megan, you've returned to school in person and are balancing a few students on remote instruction. Tell us about that. What adaptations are required for in-person teaching now?
So at the beginning of the school year, we went back full-time in person with most of our students. And at the middle school level, we each took on one grade level to teach our subject to. So I took on teaching 6th grade science. And with that, I have all of my lessons that I'm doing in person with my students that I am posting on Google Classroom. It's a requirement of our district. We have to be using that technology even in person. So I'm also posting those things for my virtual kids, but at the same time, to provide them support, I would have to be emailing them throughout the day and have a Google Meet at least once a week so I could see them. Currently, because it was so very overwhelming, as I think many teachers that are doing that have realized, I'm fortunate enough to be in a district that said, okay, we're going to burn out our teachers. We've switched to an online platform where students log in and they can watch videos, and they have science teachers, math teachers, ELA teachers with this program. But that doesn't mean that I'm not there for my students. So I am still teaching in person full time. I still have a handful of kids that I need to check in with. Big focus of everybody that's talked so far is that social emotional piece. And that's kind of my role with my distance learners at this point.
How about your own personal safety? I know there are schools in the country, the biggest one being New York City public schools, which the teachers are very fearful about going back to the classroom because they think they're not getting the right equipment to be safe. Not all of them, but many of them. How do you have this kind of fear that you might be might your life might be in jeopardy at all?
I do. I have that fear. I actually, it's a coincidence that you're asking me that question on a day that I had to send a student home from one of my classes first thing this morning um, because he had COVID-like symptoms. And so I called the nurse and he had to go home. And I'm very, very fortunate to be in a school where we have plexiglass dividers and we have hand sanitizer stations, and most of our students are wearing masks properly and all the time. But
Hmm.
it's still there. The fear is still there. They have to eat. They have to take a drink of water. They're in the same room all day. We're switching rooms as teachers. So that fear is definitely still there.
Megan, Autumn, Michael, Jeff, you're all teachers. Autumn, Michael, and Jeff, do you share Megan's fear about returning to the classroom?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo what Megan said. I'm in a situation where we are remote learning and we go back to in-person learning on Monday. And so there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of just not quite sure what to do. And how am I going to be able to take everyone's temperature and have everyone wash their hands and then get ready to make sure they eat their breakfast and then do some science and then do it all over again. And so I think just thinking about all of that and trying to maintain safety, I think it's weighing definitely heavy on a lot of teachers' hearts.
So many things of what we do in the COVID era has some element of calculated risk to it. And so in schools, like I'm lucky to be at a school where I'm teaching outdoors under a tent, but there are kids indoors. And so we've updated the filtration in rooms, hand sanitizers, everyone's wearing masks. So a lot of industries have found ways to be able to continue. And I think there are ways for schools to do it. And and the risk is the kids, remote learning certainly possesses challenges. In some ways, it's a lot of fun, but in-person learning is so important to these kids. And so if we can do everything that the science says, follow all the guidelines to the T, then I think it's a positive calculated risk for the kids.
Yeah,
Jeff?
I'll echo some of that stuff. I think where I have been, we've been doing remote learning all the way up until just currently this last week with kids, and you know, you're tossing all these different, bowling balls and pins and chainsaws all at the same time, crazy arms, trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, and then you got the kids coming in. You're super excited to see the kids because finally they laugh at your jokes, right? But the problem is, and I felt this week, is I'm so focused on trying to do all these other things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to stay safe. Like I want to go up to that kid. I want to pat him on the back and say, hey, this is the direction you need to go down the hallway. But I got to kind of stay back. And we just had parent teacher conferences with all these parents last week, and I told them, I go, I'm really excited to see your kids, but I can't really say that it's going to change a whole lot of stuff of what I'm doing right now, just because this doesn't remove any of the restrictions. I can't have groups working together to dissect a pig, or I can't have kids, measuring seeds we got to still do this as almost like a home lab type of situation. So this is more like I don't want to say a band-aid because it kind of is, but it's the psychosis of being able to come to school and having ownership with the school that this is kind of fixing in that hybrid scenario. So
I understand that one advantage of having the kids come back to your school, Jeff, is that you're a very punny guy, and it's tough to get laughs when the kids are at home.
yeah, this is very true. Jose said this with social emotional stuff, and that's kind of the way that I lighten the room. And I've within 1 week or so, there's so many dad jokes flying that they just kind of roll their eyes and they grunt, but they don't unmute their mics when you're telling these awful slash great jokes. and have them in the room, even though they have a mask on. At least you get a little feedback that they're human, and that's a good feeling. So
That's great to hear. Let's talk about some of the things that you folks are doing. Autumn, what kind of experiments can you do remotely with sixth graders? I mean, these are like preteens, right?
Yeah, it's been very challenging for a lot of our sixth graders. This is their first science class they've ever had that's really mainly focused on science. And so I just really want them to love science. Like, if that's the only thing they get from my class is that they love it, maybe they'll learn a couple things, but they like remembered they had fun in it. I've definitely is something I've focused on. And so I thought about what I could do to get them involved. And so I ended up emailing out to parents the week before a list of simple lab supplies that they could do at home. And then on Wednesdays, we would do an investigation together. And either the students could watch me do it, or if they wanted to do it on their own, just to try to start doing that. We have a wide range of socioeconomic status, so I wanted to make sure it wasn't something too complicated. But they really had a great time. Their favorite was
What was it? What was it? Was it? Fill us in on what they did.
yeah, we their favorite one was to dissect a flower, which just seems so simple. We were studying ecology and wanted to look more at producers, and so I thought that's a super easy thing. I was a botany major in college, and so I had the students get a flower and we cut them open and looked at them, and they thought it was the coolest thing they've ever done. It was such a simple thing, and they just loved it so much to be able to look at all of that. And one COVID gem is that I have access to a microscope that plugs into my computer, and so I was able to really show them some up close footage of the flower that we dissected, and they were able to show theirs. And it really, having that shared experience in a world where we're so isolated and on our own, being able to have that shared experience as a class was a really special and bonding moment. So yeah,
Well,
it was fun.
let me ask the rest of you. Have you all had such enjoyable experiences with your kids? Has everyone else had students conduct investigations without the help of traditional classroom materials? Just jump right in.
Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun. So I suppose I always have this drive to be able to do as much hands-on cool experience so that if students ask, why do I have to learn this, they'll know, have a really good answer, and they'll know why. And so we are building things. As a biology teacher, I never thought I'd be doing woodworking. I'm doing behavioral cognitive therapy and DNA regulation in my middle school lab. We're actually about to do a molecular biology at-home biochemistry experiment with kitchen safe chemicals. So it's like, there's a way to do it. And I guess like, it's a great opportunity to put on my problem solver hat and just take my mind off of the world right now. It's amazing to be able to just lose yourself in planning these amazing lessons for kids.
And you've tried being an outdoor teacher. How's that going?
It's a lot of fun. I've always been a big fan of outdoor dining, and I've enjoyed the outdoors. And so just like we're building outdoor winter gardens. So I love showing students what's possible using science, and what's more like, whoa, you can use science to grow stuff in the winter, that in New England? That's crazy. And so this idea of like, let's show you what possible, and also tapping into that community spirit, because we're building community winter gardens. And so just like, even though we're distant and 6 feet apart, it's still something we can work on together that the whole community can benefit from.
Now, Jeff, your students are in a hybrid model. What do hands-on science experiments look like in the classroom when the students can't share their equipment or work in groups?
yeah, so I operated from the get-go like, I got to get these kids. I got to get them. How do you get them? With science, it's so easy. Well, in my mind, because science is so awesome, right? So how do we get kids doing the science? So yeah, it's really kind of deconstructing and reconstructing labs that you might have had originally. So for example, both in anatomy and the AP Bio course, we do things like osmosis and enzyme catalysis and things of that nature. And I'm going, hey, we could use those cylinders that have those diplomas, the ones that graduated. We could use, well, no, wait, we can't use those. Darn it. So what can we do? Oh, we could just use teaspoons. And you'd be surprised, Ira. Apparently, hydrogen peroxide is the new toilet paper of COVID. And I'm not saying they're using it to clean. I'm saying it's really hard to find. So what it came down to was like an email to parents going, hey, do you have anything on this list? If you don't, I'm packing it up. So it would be like my planning period when I'm not teaching the kids, I'm packing up 150 bags, paper bags of materials. Like here's a disposable pipette and a wood splint. And then we set up times for the kids to go on a field trip to come to school and grab some of these things and try them from home. So when we're in the hybrid mode, I just put them on their desk, and they just do the same thing with the kids at home because I got to try to keep things in sync.
Yeah,
I don't want to have a 3-week lesson plan.
I understand that. I see everybody, just about everybody, shaking their heads with you. They're nodding in agreement. So my next question, I want to ask the whole group, is what's one thing that's going well for you that you'd want to share with other teachers? And don't be afraid to jump in with your answer. Nothing's working well for anybody. You don't want to share your secrets, huh?
One thing that's going. Oh, Jose, go.
Oh, so yeah, I was thinking because there's a lot of things that are working. Um, so this idea of it's been interesting, interacting with the families on Zoom since we're doing distance learning, and it's been interesting because I've had parent conferences during Zoom meetings, and I've had discussions with parents, and the kids get shy. It's like, well, we'll do a breakout room. We could talk really quick. So that's been an interesting connection that's been very valuable, and making those connections, even though we're distance learning, I've always liked making connections with families and understanding where my students are coming from and all the different things that they're dealing with. And, right now with everything that's going on, I have more of an opportunity to do that, which helps with everything else that I'm doing with, getting them motivated to do my, the different projects. Like everyone said, we're making kits and having them pick it up and go do the experiments at home. So it gives them that extra motivation and that understanding that, we care as teachers. So it helps with everything else. So yeah, that's, I guess that's the big secret is building relationships. And by building relationships, students will gravitate to, do the things that you want them to do and learn science and learn engineering.
Megan, I saw you wanted to jump in and say something.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Jose, kids want to do science. They want to be involved. They want to discover the world around them so to give them the opportunity to do that, they're most of the time very willing. And so whereas usually I would have students working in partners or small groups and having conversations, and I'd be walking around the room, I've had to switch to having a lot of those conversations. Okay, we're going to do this activity independently, make your observations, then we'll have a discussion as a class. And I've noticed that students are a lot more willing to share their thoughts this year in a whole class setting than they have in the past, which I think is really interesting. And maybe it's because
really
they've been so closed up for so long. I don't know.
Could it be that they don't feel the peer pressure around them because they're not in the middle of a classroom with kids in it? And so they're not afraid of being wrong or speaking out?
Well, for me, and my kids are in person with me, and
they're still and they're more active now, you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow, that's even better.
The kids that I would think that wouldn't say anything are actually speaking up in a whole class conversation, which they wouldn't normally even do in a small group setting or with a partner. So it's just this really interesting thing that's happening in these odd times.
Autumn, you're sitting there in the classroom. Do you notice that kind of thing going on also?
Yeah, I think for sure students, I've heard from many teachers that when students get back in the classroom, they're just so excited to be back in school, and they're so excited to just not be staring at a computer screen all day, that they really are more engaged and more appreciative of school, which is really awesome. And I also just want to echo what Jose said about building those relationships, and also just encourage teachers to really focus on that. I know there's content we need to get through and lessons we need to learn, but those relationships with kids, I've just taught a group of students for 9 weeks and I've never once met them in person. And because we're going back in person next week, we had to switch up our schedules. And so I said goodbye to about 80% of those students. And it was really hard to do that, which was crazy to feel this connection with a group of students students that I've never met in person before. So those relationships still matter. And even though you might not be seeing them in person, it's meaning a lot to the kids and a lot to you.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking time to chat with me this evening after school hours. It's important that we all understand how to return to school and how returning to school is maybe going to happen. There was some good news this week out of the New York City public schools. Maybe you heard the news that they're not seeing hardly as many cases of COVID in the classroom as they thought. I see, Michael, you're nodding your head with that. And so maybe there is some hope for all of us in the very near future about returning to school and having the kids enthusiastically return to classrooms. And again, I want to thank all of you for taking time to be with us today.